I have pretty good visual memory and I remember things. For example, I remember how some morning looked when I was in my 20s, when it was snowing and I was happy. So to me, that particular morning, the colors of it, the texture of the snow, all of those things, they kind of associate in my mind with happiness, like certain particular kind of happiness, very precise. So when I want to accomplish something like that in my painting, I will go into that mental library of images and colors, and I will borrow things.
So you guys, I'm just really on the edge of my seat here to be talking to Alex Kanevsky today. He's a New Hampshire-based artist, painter, figurative, landscape. His work, I am such a huge fan of his work, and kind of can't believe I'm getting to have this conversation. His work has this poetic, kind of blurred memory atmosphere thing that he does, that he accomplishes in his work. It's literally soul-stirring. And the composition, the color, the abstracted realism aspect of his work it's just flawless. It's just so beautiful. And I encourage any of you guys who are listening now to hop over to artlife.com and click on podcasts and have a look at his work, because I think it'll help inform you as we have this conversation. Welcome to Art to Life, a podcast for the creatively curious. My name is Nicholas Wilton, and each week I'll help you rediscover not just the art of your life, but the art in your life. Join me as we explore that perfect blue at twilight, the wild frontiers of art making, and the extraordinary joy of finding your way as you go. Listen, Alex, thank you so much for being here today. And as I just said, I've been a fan of your work for many years, and it's really a privilege to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you for all this. I feel much better about myself now.
Yeah, well, that's the idea. But I think there's something I'm surprised when I talk to artists and they're even having an awareness of my work. And it's really like we're all making our work in our studios and in different places. And we gain momentum by seeing what other people are doing. And I know for so many, you provide that, what you're doing. And so, Alex, there's so much to go into, but I just kind of can't resist in starting with a sort of overview. And we'll get into, your childhood a little bit, and where you kind of, from Russia, and how that influenced things, and how you think about your work, or, how you make it and everything, and the materials and stuff. But as a sort of starting point overview, I'm just curious that if you can articulate for us, like, what are you telling us in the work, and why are the paintings the way you do it? Yeah, I'm just sort of curious as a sort of starting place.
Well, I'm not telling you anything really in my work. I used to think that painting is a form of language, and, we express things with this visual language, and they're different things than we express, let's say, in English. They're visual things. But now I don't even think it is a language. I think it's just a thing within itself. It's it exists by itself. So it's not a game. It's not a language. I kind of resist having to define it. It's something that I like to do, something that interests me. And I can tell when I did something good versus when I did not. And I can like other people's paintings or dislike them. So there's some kind of way of looking at it, but without defining it, I have no message to impart.
Yes, but I guess what I'm referring to is, how your references, we make references where we look at something and we feel a certain way. And I know that that's personal, but it's also universal. And for example, when there is a feeling when I look at your work that I think is shared by many, that it feels like a glimpse or a memory, or there's something that like it I have experienced personally before, even though I'm seeing it for the first time.
Well, you literally put your finger on it. This is exactly what it is. It's since I'm not really trying to share ideas or philosophies or my political views or anything else for that matter.
Right.
I am interested, however, in a very precise emotional climate in a painting. And I noticed that you can accomplish that by using sort of like a memory library of images, colors, light, things that we operate with in the visual language. So I have pretty good visual memory and I remember things, how they looked. For example, I remember how some morning looked when I was in my 20s, when it was snowing and I was happy. So to me, that particular morning, the colors of it, the texture of the snow, all of those things, they kind of associate in my mind with happiness, like sort of particular kind of happiness, very precise.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I want to accomplish something like that in my painting, I will go into that mental library of images and colors, and I will borrow things from it and I will use it in my paintings, even though the reality of what I'm looking at is probably somewhat different. So they're recognizable images in paintings, but the sources come both from that mental library of images and also from what's in front of me. And the mix of that ends up looking, just like you said, the feeling of it, the way it feels, is more important than what's on the picture.
Yes, yes.
What's on the picture is just a vehicle.
Yes, it's just a starting place that creates that feeling. And that's kind of what I was describing, not an actual message, but it is interesting how, the warmth or the colors that you choose, that even though we weren't there when you were, that it conveys to us the same feeling, sometimes different, obviously, but many times it translates and communicates that.
Yeah, well, that was the most difficult thing to learn. Now, in retrospect, I've been doing it for a while now, so I'm not that young anymore, and I can look back at a number of years of painting, and I realized that this was the most difficult thing to do, to kind of share that emotional climate that I was talking about, how it feels to me, and make it universal, make people respond to it the way I respond to it. And, that's turned out to be much more difficult than, let's say, doing realistic, believable rendering of somebody's leg or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Wow. I'm super interested in that, what you just described, connecting emotionally. Can you go more into that, just how you do that or what you learned?
Yeah, well, what I learned is that two of the most difficult things in the world, freedom and honesty, are absolutely essential to this. It's very difficult to be honest. I mean, it's easy enough not to tell obvious lies, but being honest all the time is difficult because that puts you out of social contract, so to speak.
Yes.
If somebody asks you, how do I look this morning? And you say, you look terrible, because they do. That will not make me any friends. So honesty at all times is not an easy thing to do, but you have to do it in painting. And the freedom, allowing yourself freedom to do that, freedom of not worrying about consequences, freedom of trusting that, very subtle emotional associations, hints almost, are more important than quite well-established ideas of what we should be doing. There's so many very opinionated and very intelligent people telling us what painting is or should be. And then I go and do my thing. And it's to allow myself the freedom to do that. It took quite some years to learn.
Yeah.
So between that and honesty, that was the most difficult thing. And now that I kind of sometimes can accomplish both of those things at the same time, I am able to produce a painting every now and then that satisfies me. That's kind of roughly speaking what's going on here.
Yes.
And it's a road with no end. It's not like I've perfected this and now I'm going to just practice for the rest of my life and like produce a powerful body of work, sort of like cupcakes in a row.
Of course not. Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I work with a lot of artists and this idea of freedom to feel more like yourself when you make your art does tend to lead you to better and better work. It's just kind of, and I think this is, and you're ending up making this kind of work and someone else will end up making their kind of work. But the strength of it, the honesty of it is really predicated on feeling free, feeling that you can do whatever you want and then you can choose better,
Yeah, that is all so. But, I was born in Russia, so I have fairly dark view of the world in general. So I don't think this is all going to end well.
Sorry.
Because as we get older, that kind of inner freedom increases. But at a certain point, we pass this point of no return, we become kind of grotesque. And I have a feeling that I'm enjoying this brief time when I can do those things with freedom and honesty and enjoy them and make paintings that speak to people. But eventually it will become bizarre. It just has to.
Because you will be more disconnected from the honesty will be warped for you, or you will feel encumbered by, you'll be weakened and encumbered by the pressures of society or what's going on in the world, or why?
Not the society. Society tends to matter less and less as you get older. No, my own thing, inner freedom, trusts that you can't go wrong. That's kind of a stick with two ends because you can go wrong. And you can be going wrong for quite a while until you realize, or maybe you never realize. I mean, I have so many friends who are artists and some of them are older than me. And many people, when they get older, they start producing this interesting hermetic kind of work. Some people think it's better. Some people think it's not. But fewer people relate to it.
I definitely see that. It gets almost more basic, almost.
Well, for some people, like, you see that de Kooning's Alzheimer paintings, and of course they look more basic, but also more free and more ethereal and real. Or recently I saw a Turner exhibition, and the very end of his life, the freedom was amazing. I mean, that was a big show. There was maybe a dozen rooms. And for all of those rooms, I didn't care much for Turner. I was excited to be there, but it was just sort of like, 19th century person interested in seascapes. Until I got to the last room, when he reached some kind of level of inner freedom and this conversation with himself, that it was just absolutely amazing. It was just so astounding. It just changed so many things for me. So here's a good example of how you don't have to go wrong at the end.
Right.
And who else was... you see sometimes people's whole trajectory. Some lose it. I just don't want to start naming names.
No, I hear you.
Yeah. But I think it's all really interesting. And it's basically like walking on a tightrope or riding a bicycle. You have to keep that equilibrium. On one hand, you want to be free. On the other hand, you don't want to be an ass, and lose total touch with the rest of the world because of your amazing inner freedom that, makes you now an ultimate egotistical person.
Yes. It's like, if you keep breathing in the same brown paper bag over and over and over, it just starts recycling and references itself so much that people can't get in, and it just becomes its own little enigma,
Yeah, something like that. So I really don't know how it will go. I'm enjoying it as it is now because I'm in this point when I gotten fairly good at what I do, at least compared to what I wanted to accomplish, though not as good as I would like to be.
Well, that's good.
And I can enjoy that because every time I go to my studio, something happens that often surprises me. And all of that really has to do with being unable to define exactly what painting is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, going back to this language thing, I stopped doing artist statements long time ago because I just saw that was pointless. And I had a little statement about how it is pointless, artist statements. In it, it said that it's basically a visual language. So mixing English to it would be just increasing the confusion. So I should let my paintings speak for themselves and blah, blah, blah. It was a really nice statement, and I've been using it for years. Until recently, I was reading Cormac McCarthy's new book, Passenger. So somebody actually started speaking about music, I think, how it's not a language. It's a self-contained entity. It's something, you know, why does it have to be a language? Why cooking is not a language? Why skiing is not a language? Why does painting a language? Why being an accountant is not a language? Or whatever.
Yes.
Or a dentist. So it's just something we do, and it makes total sense for us to do, and it obviously makes sense for other people to enjoy. Meanwhile, nobody really is very good at defining it, though plenty of people try.
Which makes it so tempting and delicious to be in this undefined activity.
Fun. It's much more fun this way.
Yeah. But I think the idea that something is a language means that it's one of its primary objectives is to communicate, which that doesn't have to be what art does, or that doesn't have to be its primary, you know, the reason it was made, depending on who's making it, you know.
Well, it's actually often acts, you know, people think that they're communicating something, and maybe they are when they're doing it. But ultimately, it ends up being something entirely different.
Yeah.
You know, I keep thinking of somebody like, let's say, Kate Kollwitz, who did this wonderful, powerful drawings in Germany in 1920s and 30s. And she was really concerned with the class struggle of German workers who were really having a rough time during the World Great Depression. So all of her work was about social justice. At this point, when you look at those drawings, nobody cares. I personally don't care about the German workers' class struggle in 1920s. I just couldn't care less, sorry. But the drawings are so powerful probably because she did care. She really did care, and she really wanted to say something. And ultimately, none of them say that anymore because the times have changed. But they say something else. They have that intensity, that emotional climate of intensity that she put into them.
Yes, we still feel that. It's not specific, but just the fact that she cares so much, we feel that. It makes us wonder. I mean, I sometimes use writing in my work, but it's like nonsensical writing. It doesn't say anything, but I love that because it implies that something's being said, but it's not saying anything. But the feeling of the thing, the feeling of communication is there, or the feeling of writing. And I think that's kind of the same thing. You know, it's like,
yeah, it is. It is actually, except that you're doing it on purpose, which is interesting.
Yes.
Which implies certain level of trust that you would be able to do this kind of thing on purpose. You know, people act. And this is not that different from acting in a theater. And I could never understand how they manage to act. You know, how somebody comes out on a stage in Broadway and be the other person and make you totally believe that. And they believe that too. How that possible is beyond me. I mean, Stanislavski had this wonderful, basically the whole entire theater in Hollywood is Stanislavski system. It's so-called method acting, where he had this problem the actors were trained in his theater in Moscow. They were trained for expressionistic acting of late 19th century. They were supposed to storm back and forth on the stage and rip their hair off and be very dramatic and wail. Except that the new plays that people produced in the early 20th century were much more realistic, and it made no sense. It just looked completely fake on a stage. So Stanislavski came up with a way of retraining the actors. He told them, don't even try acting this. How can you act? Like, for example, something really overwhelming happens, like your mother died, and you have to act on the stage that, that's in the play that she died, and you have to come out on the stage and act that grief. How can you not feel like such a phony doing it? He said, don't even try acting it. It's not possible to act this. But think of some other event in your lives that has a similar emotional climate, something that made you terrifically sad and heartbroken. And thinking about that, just speak your lines. Don't act and just speak. And that will hopefully work. And it does work. That's basically the method acting.
Yeah.
So you somehow tapped into it with your writing. And I would like to be able to do that, but I haven't yet figured that out, how to do it on purpose. Yes.
It's interesting. It works. I mean, when you think of entertainment or what engages us, I've been at memorial services and people rehearse something and they share something of a loved one, but sometimes it's the unrehearsed, the 7-year-old who's standing there sharing what he's feeling. It's so powerful. It's so connecting because it's just so real and it's so authentic. And so I think I get that. I think these amazing, if you're trying to produce, if you're trying to create an emotion, you have to be in that emotion. You can't be pretending to be that, it just doesn't land as well. I'm thinking of like Apocalypse Now, De Niro, these different actors that completely go off script and they go mad in front of the camera, lose it. And it's unforgettable.
That's actually a good example of, I think, losing control of that inner freedom. If you look at somebody like Robert De Niro or Al Pacino, I think they accomplish so much of that inner freedom to transform themselves that right now they're basically doing the same thing one after another. Every time you see Robert De Niro on the screen, he's doing Robert De Niro.
Right.
And I don't want to do that, but I don't know how not to do that yet. And, of course, nobody's going to tell Robert De Niro, look, you just keep on doing Robert De Niro.
Right. You train the world to, they expect it and they want it,
I mean, for a while, it seemed like maybe social media would be good because places like Facebook gave people license to be mean to each other for no apparent reason. So you would just think, okay, maybe now I'll get some good critiques.
Yes.
But no, you just get somebody's bad day, like somebody's venom. It has nothing to do with your work.
Yes. What are you afraid to do in your work? Or do you feel like sometimes disrupting the pretty seamless kind of work you make? I'm not saying I would want you to do this, but do you sometimes feel like painting abstractly and graphic, or, do you sometimes feel like wanting to step far, far off? What would that look like?
Well, I just went to Mexico for a month to an art residency and made some clay sculptures, something I've never done. And then we cast them. And I didn't even have a model. I had to try to recreate the model that I use here in New Hampshire. I halfway working through working on that clay sculpture, I realized that I can remember her structure. It was just a head with a neck, and I could remember the neck. which was such a discovery. I just went after it. And it was just really interesting because my Spanish is not great. And there were a lot of people there, and they were all wonderful and very helpful. And they helped me to do my thing. But the communication was always slightly complicated. I don't know, first thing about sculpture. The clay came from the dirt right outside of the studio. So it was unrefined, kind of rough stuff.
Uh-huh.
I experienced every imaginable problem one would experience with the media that you're unfamiliar with.
Yeah, yeah.
And before that, the reason I even went there to do that is I tried making sculptures out of wood here. Again, something I've never done until maybe 2 years ago. I started trying. So I made 2.5 of them. It was very different from painting for me because carving sculpture out of wood is kind of a one-way street. You can remove things, but you can't add.
Yes.
Any mistake you make is potentially your, ultimate final mistake, unless you agree with yourself to keep it as a mistake and maybe make it part of the work. And I didn't really know much about it. I'm not even a very good carpenter, so I don't know that much about wood. And I didn't want to learn. I wanted to try to do a kind of a dilettante thing because, people like talking about craft lately, especially people that do figurative representational work. They like talking about craft. And I think there's even the word de-skilling that I heard recently when applied to art schools. Anyway, I have quite a lot of craft with the painting. I can do whatever I want, which is good. So it was interesting to try something with a human body without any craft.
Yes.
Like I know the body, I have a vision, I know the anatomy, I can imagine what I would like to do, and yet I run into physical craft problems every 5 seconds. I just thought it would be very interesting. And I tried a few, and it was absolutely fascinating. So now I have 3 of them. One I recently burned in a campfire, and other 2 are still existing, but I'm kind of every successive one denies the previous one because, everything is moving so fast. And this is a very exciting process for me because it's not at all like what I do in the studio with a painting.
Yeah.
And it inspired me to try things with the paintings that I'm not very good at because, everybody has their handwriting. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows how they like to use, let's say, oil paints. And they're good at that because, the mileage.
Yeah.
But you can do something else. You can try to doing it with your left foot and see what happens. Or like Bryce Marden started using those like charcoals on the end of a long bouncy stick. Yes. Stuff like that.
Yeah. It's easy to game it. Yeah.
I do it all the time. It's just like I'm not entirely sure where it all ends up. I mean, I know where it ends up. It's on a porch. It's, in a bigger scope of things. Like when I do painting, I send it to the gallery. And the gallery often sells it. So that's how I live. But those things, the sculptures, I'm not entirely sure what to do with them because I feel like they're just total research study. So yeah, there's stuff like that all the time.
It's interesting you were talking about that because you tend to use the same model, you are able to remember and you have that familiarity. And I thought that was really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is it 2 or 3 people, 5 people, 1 person? How does this?
It varies. Yeah. It varies. Usually it's 2 or 3 people that I work with, sometimes for many years, sometimes with interruptions. When you get the chemistry and it works, and it's very disrupting to have somebody in your studio when you're trying to work, which is what model is. So you have to get along with that person. They have to be able to be neutral in the context of you trying to do your work. We can chat about other things, but somehow they have to keep themselves out of that. So when you find somebody like that, you work with them as long as possible. The models themselves also have a bit of a lifespan because they do lose interest after a while. Because it's, as exciting as I try to make it, conversation, whatever, ultimately it's fairly boring thing to do, to sit there motionless for like 3 hours straight.
I couldn't do it. I can't imagine. Yeah.
Well, I tried once for a friend. It was excruciating.
Yeah.
Though she didn't entertain me very well. She used a book on CD to entertain us both. And I didn't like the book. So anyway, because I work with the same people often for extended period of time, and I know them very well, and we talk about things all the time. They know a lot about me, probably more than most people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot about them because that situation of the exposure and observation kind of encourages conversation, like more openness in conversation as well. And it's very interesting. I mean, like sometimes the thing is we're doing some kind of therapy here. I don't know who is therapist and who is being in therapy, but it definitely feels that way at times. But I never knew how much of it stays in my head. I mean, the model comes in, they come in every week because I feel like I need to be looking at somebody. I can't just make it. But in Mexico, I didn't have anybody.
Right.
So I tried, and it was fascinating. I was just like, okay, this is how the human neck works. In fact, this is how her neck worked. Even though I was making a man, it was a male head with a neck.
Yeah, you're just storing all that information.
I know, it's a massive discovery. So now I'm interested in making this atlas of anatomy, of my memory anatomy, everything that I remember. My wife also an artist, and she had this giant roll of paper that she bought recently for her own things, but I kind of confiscated the rest of it, which is probably about 10 feet long. So my next project is that I'm going to try to make this anatomy atlas, like a 2 entire figures, full size, as a drawing, but only what I remember.
Wow.
And then try to connect the dots, sort of like, like, I don't know, like Lewis and Clark traveling across the country and trying to connect the dots. Like, we don't really know what's between Ohio and Oregon, but, I think if we go west, we might get to Oregon, that kind of thing.
Right, right. When you sit down and I'm thinking, you're not just doing figurative work, or you're doing figurative work, but there's 15 people in it. And do you just have the model come in and then you start in and just sort of use her or him as a touchstone? Or are you planning it at all, the pictures you're going to make ahead of time?
I'm not that fast. So it's often the same picture many, many times over. So if somebody shows up that was modeling for the same picture last week, it's likely to be a pretty well defined situation. But originally, there are different kinds of pictures. Some start from people, more of a portrait type or a body portrait. Let's say she comes in, sits on a chair, and I look at her and I do a painting of her, of human bodies that she stands for. And it's very much based on observation and looking and perceiving things. And other times I need somebody to embody, almost like an actor. Go do this, like take this thing and throw it. I have a model now that she is an athlete. She's a biathlonist, and biathlon is skiing and shooting, that sport. And I wanted to do a number of drawings of her with a rifle because she's so comfortable with the rifle. She knows how to hold it. She knows how to stand with it.
Yeah,
she probably can shoot it very well too. So that sort of mix of extreme vulnerability of human body and sort of like a violent connotations of a loaded rifle she's holding the rifle. It was very interesting to me. So I just said, okay, well, just grab the rifle and pointed at different things. And then I took a bunch of photographs of that because the rifle is heavy. There's only so long she can hold it pointing at something.
Mm-hmm.
So I do take a lot of photographs, though that's kind of a last resort almost. I so much prefer directly, but it's not always possible.
Yes. But to have it in addition to the memory, in addition to the live model, do you work on it when they're not there?
I have to, especially when I have photographs. And the sculpture, wood sculpture especially, turned out to be so loud and dusty that models don't like to be around me working. So I did most of my work with them not there.
I see. Are these, I'm just curious, are these 4 feet tall or 8 inches tall, or how big are they?
The first one was a full human size because I was full of confidence. The subsequent ones were about half size. So I would say they're about, 4 or 5 feet tall. Yeah, something like that.
Wow. And you're carving.
I'm carving. Yes, I'm carving it with very expensive Swiss gouges that I am struggling to keep sharp.
Have you ever seen that? You probably have, but it's like it's a tool that it's electric and it chips away wood. Are you using any tools like that?
Oh, I have a huge collection of things that I'm using. I mean, I start with a chainsaw.
I love
we
that.
live here. Yeah, we live here in the country, so I actually have 2 chainsaws, one gas-powered, one electric. And I start with that, and then I go to what's known as angle grinder, which
yes.
And with some very aggressive heads that some of them look like chainsaws, others look like discs with this really scary looking teeth, and they just eat away at wood. But all of those things are a little too fast and too easy. So I only do as much as I need to if I have to remove large amounts of wood. But I really don't like using them. At first, I thought they would be so much fun. I could just do the whole sculpture with this loud and aggressive tools, And we have people here in New Hampshire that make those things. They usually have a shop by the side of the road, and they make the bears.
Yes, I was going to say a bear or a thing,
or a moose, So I didn't want to go that route. I didn't want to go that,
It's interesting, isn't it? To take this incredible piece of wood that has so much integrity to it. I mean, just a chunk of wood, and then turn it into a bear. That isn't really a bear, and you don't get a bear, and you don't get the original feeling, the amazing feeling of the wood. I mean, it's a tricky line, but I immediately flashed on going by and seeing the Indians standing there. That's what I would be as scared of if I was you. I wouldn't have the confidence to do it. I don't know if I could create the feeling. I don't know. I'm not sure how I would approach it, but I'm really curious. I really want to see what have you shared this? Have you shared these sculptures with anyone?
Oh yeah, they're all over the Instagram.
Oh, good. I'll go check. We'll put some in. I wasn't aware of them.
My second one is in my gallery in New York, which kind of, they like it. I liked it. It equally makes me cringe and love it every time I see it. The first one, like I said, I burned it down. It's, you can see them. They're Instagram or in Hollow Staggered Gallery.
Okay, great. You talked about earlier the sort of darkness, maybe you're growing up in Russia and just the different emotions of that time. What was that like, and how did that inform you? And when you look back on it now, I'm just so curious.
It's an entirely different place where I grew up. It doesn't exist anymore. It's really not Russia. It was what was known as Soviet Union, which was this giant empire cobbled out of various countries that have zero interest in being part of it. what's going on with Ukraine now is sort of like an aftermath of that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was born in Russia, and at some point when I was 15, my whole family moved to Lithuania, which is one of the small Baltic republics in the west of former empire. Where I grew up originally in Russia was not terribly interesting. Maybe it's an interesting place now, but at the time it wasn't. It was a giant provincial city, very industrial, kind of gray. Nothing terribly interesting went there. But when we arrived to Vilnius, to Lithuania, that was very interesting because it was entirely different. It was this medieval little town where people acted differently and looked differently. And there was a lot of art galleries and they made art. I didn't like that art very much, but I liked that they're making it. Yeah. Because it was, I grew up with kind of a socially mandated art. In Soviet Union, you had to do what was known as social realism, like workers and peasants with this like massive Popeye-esque, what do you call those things? Forearms and calves and everything bulging, and they're all just progressing towards brighter future with their tractors and hammers. There's only so much of that you can take. And then I come to Lithuania and nobody's doing the bulging arms. In fact, they're doing some kind of their own version of quite extreme German expressionism. Lots of paint, very dark, very moody, not pretty at all. And I just remember looking at those things and thinking there's no workers and peasants here. In fact, half the time I can't tell what's in there. And I really don't like any of those things, but I just absolutely love that people are doing them.
Yes.
Like they're doing something that doesn't have an obvious political reason for being, or reason, like a pragmatic reason. Like the art is here to advance the social causes. Like we have, something's going on in this country now, which kind of reminds me a lot of that. And then Lithuanians were doing this thing that just was completely unconcerned with outside factors. They're like, we're just going to do those very heavily impasted paintings of barely recognizable objects, and they'll be really dark, and there'll be about an inch thick paint on them. And if you don't like it, that's okay. And I just thought, this is great. I want to be an artist. Just that alone made me want to be an artist. That was probably the most inspiring thing, that I could see something that I don't like and be so inspired by that.
I love that. It makes sense. It makes sense in context with where you were before, and that was mandated, and suddenly there's possibility.
Yeah, well, see, it was mandated in Lithuania too, and some people did all the proper things, but many of them didn't. Because Lithuania, like many of other republics of Soviet Union, really didn't have all that much say in their membership in this union. They just got kind of hoarded into it. So they were not likely to go with established politics, and they just wanted to do their own thing. And now that they are an independent country and have been since 96, they're still doing very much their own thing. That was very formative for me as an artist. It just kind of gave me this feeling like I like people that do something just because they feel like doing it and they don't really care how that fits in a bigger picture and what it will do for them.
Yes. Freedom and honesty.
Yeah.
When did you come to the US?
I came in 83.
Okay.
My whole family came in. My parents basically moved me and my brother here to Philadelphia. And I've been in Philadelphia for a long time, for 30-something years, ever since we arrived.
Wow.
Until recently, we moved to New Hampshire.
And this is, the kind of work I know you were teaching for a lot of years as well. But I mean, is this when was the big change in your work, or what happened when you arrived here? Did it change things for you, your work, or?
Well, I didn't really do any work. I was more of in a dreaming stage, like I want to be an artist.
Oh.
I was 20 years old and probably somewhat arrested in my development, because many people are like fully formed artists by the time they're 20.
Yeah.
I was doing some horrendous, ugly things. I mean, my mom had a collection of them, and every time I would see them, that was a rough experience. I arrived here with nothing, and I couldn't afford to go to any art school. And I wasn't a citizen or resident of the country, so I couldn't get any financial aid. So I just worked. I had a job drawing pictures for Yellow Pages.
No way.
I know. It was like an honest to goodness, genuine sweatshop in Chinatown. It was great.
Ah.
It had like a dozen artists. We were called artists there. And we were all drawing like pizzas and lawnmowers and dishwashers
Oh my God.
in rapidograph pens on a mylar. And we're all sitting in this one room without air conditioning, and everybody was chain smoking all the time. So, and everybody was either emerging artist or emerging musician. I don't know how many of us emerged at the end, but everybody was emerging. So I did that for a number of years. It was a lot of fun. I met a lot of really interesting people. And eventually I got a job being a graphic designer in some design studio in Philadelphia. And I worked there for a couple years. I think I even became art director of a little magazine. And then after a couple of years, I just looked at myself and said, I have to get out of this. I can't do this stuff anymore. So I went to Academy of Fine Arts and enrolled as a student and studied there for 4 years and then started painting.
Oh, wow. It's amazing.
It's, in a nutshell, that's the trajectory.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible that you dreamt for so long. You're still evolving, but in dreaming, in thinking.
You mean dreamt about being an artist?
Yeah.
Well, that's what I always wanted to be. Oddly enough, I'm one of those fortunate people that never had to search for occupation. This is always what I wanted to be, except for when I was 4 years old, I wanted to be a trolley driver. One of those buses with two things on electric wires that don't even exist anymore. But that was brief. After that, it was all artist, 100%. So, because of that, maybe it was easier for me than other people. I had very low expectations, about making a living or being famous or anything like that. I just wanted to do it. That's all I wanted. And if I had to work somewhere in some sweatshop in Chinatown, then I would do it. That's fine. It's okay. And for a while, that's what I did. But then it kind of took off, more or less.
Yes.
So I didn't have to draw the pizzas and bicycles.
But I really want to see those.
Me too, actually, but I don't think Yellow Pages exists anymore.
No, I know. That's true. But maybe if we found some old editions, we could find your work. But they probably didn't let you sign them, right? It wasn't about...
No. They weren't allowed to sign it. I would be able to recognize my own, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of them were quite sloppy, because I was starting to evolve, so to speak.
Yes. So what's coming up for you? We're kind of nearing the end here. I just wanted to, what's coming up you're excited about or challenging you next? So
many things. My work is in a couple shows that are going on right now, like in San Francisco at Dolby Chadwick. We finally, after many years, talked the gallery into doing a drawing show, and I got to show with some of my heroes, people like Anne Gale or Edwige Favre or Emilia Villalba, probably pronounce Villalba. So that is very interesting for me, that project, because it's different kind of works than what I normally do. The sculptures and the paintings that I managed in this 1 month in Mexico are there in a gallery, but the sculptures, we just cast them in resin. So now we're kind of have a vague plan of maybe trying to cast them in bronze, which would involve going to Mexico City to a foundry. And to me, that's a very exciting project because I've never been there. And just this month in Mexico, I just think this is one of the most exciting and interesting countries I've ever been to. So there's that. I have a couple shows planned, but nothing right this minute. I think the next thing will be in September in San Francisco, my show. I don't know. Oh, well, we're going to Ireland to do some more paintings of waves and cliffs and God knows what else. That's always exciting. My wife and I we have been going back to Ireland every few years. We had a long break during the COVID, which nobody could go anywhere. But now in May, we get to go back and do some painting there.
And you'll be, it's like you'll be plein air painting on the.
Oh, totally. It's like, there's nothing like painting plein air in Ireland. Yeah. It's extreme sport. There's usually like a 30 miles an hour wind and rain flying horizontally. And you try to hold it all together and paint something in it. It's a lot of fun, but it can be disconcerting at first. Yeah, it's sort of like extreme sport.
Does she do landscape or?
She does abstract paintings. Her name is Hollis Hiker, my wife, and she does abstract paintings, but they actually all based on the landscapes. She just doesn't do them directly. There's no gap between me looking at something and me painting that. For her, there is a gap. She goes for a run every morning, and they're long runs, they're like 10, 15 miles. And she looks around, and we live in a very rural area up in the mountains and the woods here. So she sees all those things, mountains, trees, light, animals. And then she comes back home, does a number of things, and eventually goes to her studio. And somehow by that point, that crystallized in her mind into some kind of abstract composition that is only vaguely related to the landscapes that she's been looking at.
Right. It's that's the best way in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like it's one more step added in like the steps that consist of disconnects that is added in the middle.
Yes. I relate to that a lot. I use that. I use a lot of disconnects.
You have that gaps that you introduced in the middle?
Yeah. And actually, I use running in the same way.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're a runner as well?
Yeah.
I don't run.
Yeah, you don't run. No. How do you break up your day then? With you're in the studio. It's fairly a certain feeling, and then do you do walks or what? How do you paint in the morning?
I do something. It's very rural. It's not near anything. So every day I have to do some kind of physical thing. Mm-hmm. Like I have to move those rocks from here to there, or I have to chop some wood so I can hit the house, or I have to plant something, or some tree falls on something that it shouldn't have fallen onto. So I have to chainsaw remove it.
Yes.
But we also do a lot of, hiking, skiing in the woods, cross-country skiing out in the woods, skiing in the mountains, cycling through the mountains and the mountain bikes. Like a lot of things. The weather is so changeable here that you basically have to have a massive collection of this equipment because it only works with a certain kind of weather.
Right. The toys. Yes.
Yeah. Like right now, the winter is here, but the snow all melted, but then it got cold. So the only thing we can do at the moment is either take walks, or actually we can right now skate on a frozen lakes, which is very exciting and scary and beautiful. Imagine miles and miles of mirror-like surface, sometimes transparent so you can see to the bottom, and you can just skate that.
I love it. What a beautiful
Yeah.
What a beautiful thing.
Until you fall through, and then it's less pleasant.
That abrupt ending. Alex, listen, thank you so much for having this conversation today. It's just really, really lovely to finally meet you and hear more about your work. Fabulous.
Thank you. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Art to Life show. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help me get the word out by sharing it with your friends on Instagram at @arttolife_world. The recording of this and all episodes, along with a place to leave comments, see additional photos, and discover a whole new approach to making art, can be found by going to arttolifepodcast.com. And secondly, if you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on today, I would super appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my artist list, every Sunday morning I send out a video blog all about art making. Go to arttolifepodcast.com to sign up. And all these links are in the show notes, of course. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.